In the heart of early medieval Europe, where tribes clashed, kingdoms shifted, and empires were carved by sword and fire, one conflict would shape the fate of an entire continent. This is the story of two worlds colliding: the rising Frankish Empire under Charlemagne and the ancient, fiercely independent Saxon tribes who refused to kneel. The road that led them to Verden was paved with loyalty, betrayal, resistance, and unthinkable decisions. A road soaked in blood and remembered for one of the darkest moments in Carolingian history. The conflict began long before the world heard the name Verden. The Saxons and the Franks were neighbors, but they were never friends. For generations, their borders were a place of raids, retaliation, and uneasy silence. But when Charlemagne became king, silence was no longer enough. To him, the Saxon frontier was a doorway to power, Christian influence, and a unified Europe. And he would not allow a pagan, independent people to stand in his way. His first campaign was swift. Villages burned, sacred groves fell. The Irminsul, symbol of Saxon faith, was destroyed to the root. Charlemagne believed he had broken their spirit. He believed the war was already won. He was wrong. Because deep in the forests, a man named Widukind was rising, and he would become the beating heart of Saxon resistance.
Peace returned, but it was the kind of peace that trembles under its own weight. The Saxons bowed, but their eyes still carried fire. Charlemagne returned to their lands, not as a conqueror, but as a ruler demanding submission. Across rivers, forests, and bitter winds, the Frankish banners reached the Weser River. There, the Saxon nobles were gathered, leaders of tribes who had fought for centuries to remain free. But this time, they stood alone. Their greatest leader, Widukind, had vanished. Some said he fled north. Others whispered he was preparing something far more dangerous. In his absence, the Saxon nobles were vulnerable, and Charlemagne seized the moment. He demanded an oath, not a simple promise, but a vow that bound blood, land, and generations. Swear loyalty to the Frankish crown, or be crushed under its weight. One by one, they stepped forward, voices shaking, hands trembling, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. This oath, forced under the shadow of swords, marked the first fracture in Saxon unity. But far away, hidden among ancient trees, Widukind watched and made his own vow. The Saxon spirit will not break. Not today, not ever. Charlemagne believed the oath would end the rebellion. But oaths taken in fear rarely last. As winter crept across the land, the Saxons struck back. Not with armies in open fields, but with shadows in the forests. Frankish outposts were attacked, supply wagons disappeared, patrols were ambushed before sunrise, and leading these raids was Widukind. He had returned with allies from Denmark and Nordalbingia, forged by a shared hatred of Frankish expansion. The Saxons knew the terrain, every river, every valley, every hidden path. Their strikes were sudden, brutal, and untraceable. To the Frankish soldiers, the forest itself seemed alive and hostile. Charlemagne was furious. This was not rebellion. This was humiliation. He could not allow the North to become a symbol of defiance. He gathered a massive force and prepared to crush the uprising once and for all. But Widukind was not finished. His greatest victory was yet to come, and his greatest mistake, too.
The year was 782, a year that would stain the Carolingian Empire forever. Widukind and his warriors lured the Frankish forces into the Suntel Mountains. It was a trap crafted with precision. The Franks suffered a devastating defeat. Veteran soldiers fell. Commanders were slain. A Frankish army, humiliated by tribes they viewed as inferior. But victory came with consequences. When news reached Charlemagne, the king who had once shown patience showed none now. His pride had been wounded, his authority challenged, and he would retaliate with unprecedented ferocity. He issued a decree. All captured Saxon warriors were to be brought to the river near Verden. Thousands were gathered, men who had fought for their homes, their families, their ancient gods. Charlemagne accused them of breaking the oath, of betraying the empire, of treason. And for treason, he delivered a single, terrible punishment, one that would echo through history and define the legacy of a king and the suffering of a people.
The morning at Verden was cold. Mist clung to the riverbanks like a shroud. Frankish soldiers stood in rigid silence, their faces pale, their hands trembling. Before them, thousands of Saxon prisoners knelt. Some prayed to their old gods, some whispered final words to their children. Some stared defiantly at the horizon, refusing to show fear. Charlemagne arrived on horseback, not triumphant, but grim, as if he knew the weight of what he was about to do. He read the judgment aloud, a judgment that would change the fate of all who listened. 4,500 Saxons were sentenced to death. The Verden Massacre, a decision scholars still debate, but one that the Saxons never forgot. Steel flashed. Cries rose into the cold air. The river ran red. It was not a battle. It was an execution. And when the sun finally set, the Saxon rebellion was shattered. Widukind vanished into legend, and Charlemagne marched forward, a king celebrated for empire and condemned for cruelty. But one truth remained. Empires are not forged by glory alone. They are forged by choices, choices that live long after the swords have rusted. Verden was such a choice, and the road that led to it was paved with ambition, resistance, loyalty, betrayal, and the blood of those who refused to kneel.
This was not just the story of Charlemagne and the Saxons. It was the story of two visions for the world, one forged by empire and the other by freedom. The road to Verdun remains one of history's most tragic crossroads, a reminder that power always demands a price and that the cost is often paid in lives.